I wish I learned scales this way when I started piano. When learning scales, people always start with C major. It's the easiest to read as it has no flat or sharp symbols, and the easiest to learn as it only uses the white keys. Supposedly, that also makes it the easiest to play. However, there's a few things people haven't considered. One is that it's the most difficult for the hand as it has no pivot, making it difficult to cross the fingers. 2. It doesn't conform to the shape of the hand. All the keys are on the same level, which doesn't accommodate the longer fingers. And 3. The finger crossings happen at different times between the hands, making it very hard for beginners to keep track of when to cross each hand. Now, in this video, I'll teach you the best way to learn all the major and minor scales with good technique from the very first scale. If you want a book to see the fingerings, I'll link the one I use in the description. Real quick, hello, I'm Kevin, and I've been a self-taught pianist-composer for 8 years, and I learned piano by reading how the greatest pianists taught and played. This video specifically is based on the teachings of Chopin and expands on it. The way he taught was innovative. His ideas were unique in his time and unique today, because the struggle of learning scales has existed for hundreds of years, and yet the most common approach hasn't changed at all. Well, Chopin taught scales in a way that sought to fix that, so I'd like to share some quotes that served as the basis for this method. It's useless to start learning scales on the piano with C major, the easiest to read and the most difficult for the hand as it has no pivot. Begin with one that places the hand at ease, with the longer fingers on the black keys, like B major for instance. The scales with many black keys, B, F sharp, and D, were studied first, whereas C major, as the most difficult, came last. Start with the B major scale and work through them one by one to C major, moving back one finger at a time. By working backwards from these quotes, I genuinely believe this method is the best way to learn scales. Now, before we even think of scales, let's start with how to touch the keys. First, place your right hand on the keys, such that the 3 long fingers rest on the 3 black keys, and the 2 short fingers rest on the leftmost white keys. Align the long fingers horizontally, and the short fingers horizontally. This position gives them a strong curve that allows them to play evenly. It's also the most comfortable position for the hand. If it's your first time touching the keys, play in this position until you're used to it without stiffness. We'll call this the first hand position. To make sure your posture is correct, sit with your wrist in line with your hand and your elbow level with the white keys. Now we'll place the hand on the 2 black keys to the left, where the thumb now rests again on the leftmost white key. This is the second position. Play the 3 notes ascending left to right, and then play the notes of the first position also ascending left to right. Guess what? You just learned how to play B major, the easiest scale for the right hand. Note that every scale has 2 hand positions, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3. Now we'll learn the easiest scale for the left hand. Again, we'll place the left hand on the 3 black keys in the same way, but now our thumb and our pinky will rest on the rightmost white keys. Align the fingers horizontally here as well, and play the notes in this position until you're used to it without stiffness. This is the first position. Then we're going to move our hand to the 2 black keys on the left, with our thumb again resting on the rightmost white key. This is the second position. Then we'll play the notes ascending in both positions. We added another key, which is the same as the first key in the second position, but now you've just learned D flat major, the easiest scale for the left hand. Now for the last of the easiest scales. All of these scales use all the black keys, but where B major uses the leftmost white keys and D flat major uses the rightmost, F sharp major uses the outermost. Here's what that looks like. Learn F sharp major in both hands separately. These scales allow the hand to pivot on the black keys, making it easy to cross the fingers. They conform to the shape of the hand by only having the long fingers on the black keys and the short fingers on the white keys. And we didn't have to learn any weird patterns to figure them out. So, we've just covered the easiest scale for the right hand, the easiest scale for the left hand, and F sharp major, an easy scale for both hands. Now, I'd like to talk about approaching the other scales with black keys. The easiest scale for the hands have the most black keys. So, as we lower the number of black keys, the scales become more and more difficult to play. Knowing this, how do we approach the rest of the scales in increasing difficulty? Well, for the right hand, we're going to learn the scales with sharps, starting with the most until we reach the scale with 1. This happens to be the right side of the circle of fifths. If you didn't know, the circle of fifths is an arrangement of all 12 keys, where each key is a perfect fifth above the previous one, moving in a clockwise motion. Among the scales we're learning, F sharp has the most sharps at 6, with B at 5, and each scale closer to C has 1 less sharp, whereas C has none. To memorize the order easily, I break it down into 4 groups. The top is F, C, and G. The bottom is F sharp, and the sides spell out the word bead, with the right going up and the left going down. The left side, however, all have flats. Now, back to learning scales. After B, we learn E, then A, then D, then G. We'll tackle the issue of C major later. This order of learning scales gradually gets the right hand used to playing more and more white keys, finger by finger. This lets us tackle them from easiest to hardest. What you'll notice is that, of the two neighboring white keys, all of the major sharp scales use the leftmost white keys, B and E, just like B major. So, we've just covered all the sharp scales going from easiest to hardest. But the flat keys are going to be miserable, you're probably thinking. You had a trick for learning the sharp sides, but surely there's nothing for the flats. Well, yes, the flat scales are harder to learn and practice. They start on awkward fingers. But I have a solution. Remember how all the sharp scales use the left of the two neighboring white keys? Well, all the flats use the rightmost of the two neighboring white keys. That's not all. The flat scales mirror their opposing sharp scales. Pay attention. I'll mirror the right side of the keyboard. Now, if I highlight all the keys of B major, look what appears on the left side. It's all the keys of D flat major. This relationship is true for all flat keys. E major becomes A flat major, A major becomes E flat major, D major becomes B flat major, and G major becomes F major. The best part? The fingerings for the right hand are mirrored for the left hand. The only difference is the starting note. Since every flat scale is a mirrored version of a sharp scale you already know, it's a lot easier to learn. I couldn't believe this when I discovered it. It's incredible. So, you've just covered an easy way to learn the flat scales in the left hand. At this point, your hand should be pretty comfortable cruising across the keys. Now, we need to learn the opposite side in the opposite hand. So, learn the sharp scales in the left hand from B to G, and the right hand the flat scales from D flat to F. We learn these scales now because it's a lot easier to learn the awkward starting positions when we already know the keys of every scale. After that, you can practice hands together if you have the coordination for it. To develop hand coordination, check out question 1 of this video here. Now, we can finally tackle the hardest scale, the behemoth, that is C major.
That's a behemoth.
I would be mad enough to tame such a beast.
All the other scales up to this point used black keys, which allowed the hand to pivot on them, making finger crossings easy. But C major doesn't have any black keys. So, we're gonna need a different way of playing scales. There's 2 changes we'll need to make to our technique. First, we'll keep the hand turned slightly inward as we play. So the right hand turns left, and the left hand turns right, slightly. Second, we'll squish together the non-playing fingers in the direction of the scale. And third, we'll curl the thumb under the fingers when not in use. This lets us cross the fingers without needing to pivot. With our fingers squished together, we can play faster, as the distance they travel to cross shortens. And with our thumb curled under, crossing becomes effortless. This can be a lot for beginners, which is why this scale ought to be taught last. So, that covers the best way to learn all the major scales. Now for the minor scales. Watch this only after you've learned all the major scales. So like the video, subscribe, or save it or whatever. And when you're ready, in a month or 6, watch this next part.
Several months later.
Have you learned them all? Alright, let's start. The melodic minor scale is the only scale you need to learn. Why is that? Well, I went and researched different piano method books, and when teaching the minor scales, they always started with the natural minor. They start with it because it's easy to read, easy to learn, and easy to play. And while that's true, it's a compromise. It's a compromise because it doesn't teach you to play the minor scale the way it's used in actual music. To further emphasize this point, I researched method books from the 1800s, from some of the most brilliant minds in piano music history. And guess what? Whenever they taught the minor scale, they only taught the melodic minor scale. There was no mention of the natural minor scale at all. Since you have the technique to play all the major scales, the order in which you learn the minor scales doesn't matter. One way to approach them is to learn them based on the order of their relative majors in the circle of fifths. So we start with A minor, go clockwise to E minor, etc. Now, the melodic minor is different ascending versus descending. Here's an easy way to remember the melodic minor scale. Let's take C minor for example. In ascending, the only difference compared to C major is that the third is minor. So we take the third and move it down a half step. Simple enough? But in descending, the 6th and the 7th also become minor. So we take the 6th and the 7th and also move them down a half step. Also, you learn the natural minor scale too, as it's the same keys as the descending melodic scale. These scales are also in the book in the description. And notice how the leading tone, aka the 7th, is often notated with a sharp, sometimes with a natural in the flats, sometimes with a double sharp in the sharps, but never with a flat. Side note, there's a free PDF with all the illustrations used in this video in the description. So, we've just covered the best way to learn all the minor scales. Now, I learned a lot from the greats, but one of my longest struggles was octaves, so I researched how Liszt taught them and practiced. The result is that it made octaves incredibly easy, so watch this video to learn more about that. Thanks for watching.